Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Commander Pod, your Magic the Gathering podcast for all things Commander. I'm Spencer Simpson.
And I'm Kelton Howe. So you've heard us talk a lot about power levels on this channel, and they are super important and probably the most important thing to think about when you're deck building. But there are other things to consider.
Yes, so this week we're going to be talking about things you might consider beyond power levels when you're building your next Commander deck. Because like Kelton said, power levels are the most important thing, one of the most important things when you're starting building a deck, because it gives you a target to build towards. But there are also other things that you think about, right, when you're building your deck. I mean,
definitely.
Outside of just like what power is this going to be?
Oh, sure, like the strategy, but also just like what kind of play experience you're wanting to build for the table. And that's what we're going to talk about. And a big disclaimer here, many of these are very playgroup dependent. So we're going to share things that we consider for our playgroup. We're also going to share some things that we've heard from other playgroups. But in the end, it really comes down to what kind of play experience you want for your playgroup.
Yeah, and we're going to try to divorce this as much as we can from a power level discussion. We've talked a lot about power levels. Like Kelton said, we talk about them a lot. And while some of these things might tie into power levels, and we'll point that out as we come across them, I think, we're not going to be focusing on the power level portion of the discussion.
Yeah. So let's start with general goals when we're building a commander deck outside of power levels. We have kind of two broad goals in mind, I think. And the first one is building a functional, consistent deck, something that's fun for us to play.
Yeah. So one being fun for us, which naturally leads into number two, which is curating a fun play experience for the table for everyone else, right? So Fun for us, fun for everyone else. And number one's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Right?
I do think it's pretty easy. And it's also really important. Okay, and it's not easy. It takes a lot of practice to build a really good, consistent deck. But you're not worrying about what other people are thinking when you're doing that part.
Yeah, I guess maybe not more easy, but more natural, I think. Like it's a more natural thing to lean into in your deck building and more conscious.
Yeah, and it's really important, I think, for cultivating a fun play experience for yourself, because it's building consistent deck ensures that your deck is going to be able to do the thing that you built it to do. And that way, even if you don't win, you're going to be happy with its performance and you're going to have had fun. Yeah. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else is going to have fun playing against your deck.
Yeah, and as you say that, I think I should amend what I said, which is that it's easy, and it gets easier over time. It's not initially hard, but I do think I stand by it being like a natural thing. That each, from the beginnings of your deck building experience, it is very natural to want to build a deck that functions well. But in our discussions, we had a harder time figuring out how you optimize for fun in deck building for other people.
Yep, exactly. Because as part of that deck building process, we're not always looking at cards and thinking, oh, I'm going to include this card because it looks like it's going to be really fun for everyone else to play against.
Yeah. I mean, me winning isn't necessarily like super fun for everyone else, right? And so for me to optimize for fun for other players, do I just like play worse cards, or do I play like really group huggy cards, or do I play cards where it's like, hey, we all get something and that's kind of cool, but maybe I benefit asymmetrically in some way, which I guess is group hug, right?
Yeah.
But I think where we landed was that what we're in our deck building, we're not maximizing for everyone else having the most fun.
Yeah.
We're minimizing the stuff that's unfun, right?
Exactly. Yeah, because there are play patterns that just end up being unfun. And if it's something that I can tell is really making my opponents have a consistently unfun play experience, it's really making me have less of a fun play experience. So we include cards that are fun for us, make your deck work, make your deck consistent, and then we intentionally exclude cards that are unfun for everybody else. To a point.
Yeah, to a point. And I do think that this is something we mentioned earlier is tied with power levels to some degree, right?
Sure.
Where as you move up in power levels, you are less worried about things that are unfun and more worried about making your deck win. And I do think that especially happens at like 4 and 5, right? 1 through 3, I think it's a pretty steep curve where you are not worried about it, if that makes sense. Like, you should be worried about it, and then at 4 it drops off a little bit, and then at 5 it probably drops off a lot.
And that's because in medium high and high power levels, there's just a lot more interaction to be able to deal with unfun threats, right? And also, you are just playing to win to an extent. So it really does come down to deck building for low, mid, and mid power level decks. And I think a quote that sums this up really nicely is from Sheldon Menery, who said, build casually, play competitively. Because you really want that to happen in the deck building phase. You don't want to sandbag. It feels so bad to sandbag when you're playing. So when we're building casually, after we've built our decks or while we're building our decks, we do go through and filter out the unfun cards. Just cards that we've played that we're like, I don't like how that plays. I don't like the play experience that it creates for the table. That way, when we're actually playing, we can play to win.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost like each card passes through a filter. Like, it goes through, like, it's like a screening, right? The card shows up, and we're like, I think this will be good for my deck. Is this going to be expressly just very unfun for everyone else? And if so, we kind of just take it out, right? And there's probably some balance of that. Like, you had mentioned that you play Elish Norn in your Brago deck, right?
I do. Yeah, I went through kind of a journey with that one. Initially, I took it out because I saw Elish Norn play, and I was like, oh, that actually shuts down a lot more than you think. Do you have Elish Norn up? Could you read it before I get too deep into this?
It's Elish Norn. There are several Elish Norns. This is Elish Norn, Mother of Machines, which is probably the best iteration of Elish Norn currently. It is a legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor, for 4 and a white, and has power and toughness 4/7. Elish Norn has vigilance, and it has 2 really good abilities. The first being, if a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. And the second is, permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities of permanents your opponents control to trigger.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised at how many effects your opponents control that trigger off of an enter the battlefield ability. And so it just, even if the deck isn't built around those things, it just shuts down a lot of cards. And that can feel pretty unfun.
Yeah. And you discovered that playing against one of my decks, which I haven't built. I just kind of theory crafted it. It was an Atraxa Grand Unifier deck that was built around a bunch of ETBs.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, and it had a bunch of enter the battlefield effects, and it was really cool and good in that deck. And you were playing Rachel Weeks's Ratchet mono white deck, if you remember. And that does a bunch of artifact ETBs. And so
it did hose that deck.
It hosed that deck very specifically, but also I think it was Pant Laza that our friend was playing at the time. This is a 3-player game, which is also different. Which cares about ETBs. Creatures, when you ETB, they discover based on their toughness. And so it hoses that deck too, but I think we were just surprised at like how much it actually screws people up. And so you ended up taking out, but then, right, you put it back in.
I did put it back in because it works really well for the deck that I put it in. Mm-hmm. And it also acts as a lightning rod in that deck for a deck that can have a hard time finishing out a game and can feel kind of grindy, and where the commander frequently gets removed because it itself is a threat. Mm-hmm. So it felt really good to put it back in, and so far I haven't had a problem with it. So I've kind of balanced it out. I don't think it belongs in all of my decks,
no,
but it plays pretty well in this one. It's balanced out by the rest of what that deck is trying to do.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that is a really good example of how it is a little bit of a formula, right, that you have to think about, which pairs how unfun something might be with the strategy that you're playing. But just to go to the second point of this, we're building casually, passing things through a filter. We're playing competitively because at the end of the day, we talked about this in a previous episode about making suboptimal plays. And I think where we ultimately landed was that like we'd really try not to, because at the end of the day, they can hurt feelings even sometimes, right? Because you're picking favorites, or there's lots of reasons you might be doing it, but things can end up maybe feeling more personal than logical.
Yeah, we talked specifically about spite plays, which I think everybody can understand just from the name is not a good idea. That is a suboptimal play that is just not a good thing to do.
Yeah.
But where I think playing suboptimally can unintentionally hurt feelings is bad threat assessment, right? If Spencer, if you have a threat out on the board, but there's a bigger threat somewhere else on the board, and I'm like, oh, what Spencer has is so scary, I need to remove it. And I remove it, you might look at that and be like, why did you remove my thing? Like, why didn't you remove the thing that was a bigger threat? Now I just feel like you personally targeted me. So,
yeah.
And so if I'm making a suboptimal decision to be like, oh, I want to be nice to that person, you won the game this last time, I'm going to target you instead, then that can unintentionally hurt feelings. Whereas if you're making a competitive play, if you're making an optimal play, everybody can understand, I see why they made that play. This was the biggest threat. This was the best decision. This is what gave them the best win chance at a win. And so playing competitively can actually help cultivate a more fun play experience by reducing the chance for hurt feelings.
Yeah. And we feel comfortable playing competitively because we've passed every card through our filter. And we feel generally good about the fact that we're not playing a lot of really unfun effects, right?
And that they're at the right power level.
Right power level.
We've done the work in deck building to build casually so that we don't have to sandbag when we're playing and we can actually play to win.
Yes, and I think we're going to talk about maybe some instances later where things might pass through that filter and not have been filtered appropriately, right? Like it's...
Sure.
Because sometimes you miss stuff. Like inevitably you do because you're goldfishing and you're just playing by yourself, and it's not perfect, but it is good. I think to try to I think that's a really good philosophy. I have not read a lot of Sheldon Menery's stuff. For those who don't know, Sheldon Menery is like the godfather of Commander, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
But I really like that a lot. I think that's a really solid take. So
love it. Thank you, Sheldon.
Yes, thank you, Sheldon. So if we're going to be avoiding unfun play experiences and play patterns, what kind of things are we intentionally not including? What does this filter hit, right? What's being knocked out of our decks?
Yeah, I think there are things that we personally avoid that are very similar to a lot of people in the Commander community. So things like mass land destruction. we don't really play that. Most of us aren't really interested in playing that. It's never really come up as an issue, but we understand why it's an issue and that a lot of people feel that way. Things like a lot of stacks. That's kind of a broad umbrella. Maybe that's like painting with too broad of a brush. And we do play occasional stacks, like Blind Obedience or Ghostly Prison or whatever.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
It is a pretty broad umbrella because another thing we're going to be talking about are things that like don't end the game right away, right? Yeah. And I think stacks kind of fits that bill to some degree, right? Where it halts the game. Yeah, right, exactly. Like we actually have a friend that came and played with us a little while ago who really likes stacks. They love playing stacks. And because we traditionally have not played stacks a lot, we
couldn't deal with it.
We couldn't because I had taken a lot of removal out of my decks in favor of protection, and then I was like, well, I can't. I literally can't do anything about this. But now I know, and I know the thing in his deck that's going to mess me up, and I'll save my removal for it, right?
Sure.
But that's not to say we don't play like any stacks. We'll play like light stacks pieces, right? Like,
yeah, and I think for the most part, it's just not generally the main strategy of our decks,
right?
Like, and it's not like heavy stacks that makes it so nobody can play anything. It doesn't like soft lock the game for everybody.
Yeah, it's happened. It's happened once with my Rada Drobic deck.
It did. You created
Thalia.
A bunch of Thalias.
Yeah, Thalia. Yeah. It's not Heretic Cathar. What's the other one?
Guardian of Thraben. Is it
Guardian of Thraben? Yeah. So. Let me read these cards because I need to explain what happened.
Sure.
So can I read Rada Drobic and then you can read Thalia?
Yep.
If I can spell Rada Drobic. Rada Drobic of Urborg. One of the few legends, I think, that doesn't have a comma in his name anywhere. Is 2 white black for a 3/3 legendary creature zombie wizard. that has Vigilance and Ward 2. Oh, so good. So I forget about that all the time.
The Ward?
The Ward, yes.
Yeah, it sucks.
Way more comfortable to cast that on turn 3. And he says, other zombies you control have Vigilance. And then the next ability is, whenever another legendary creature you control dies, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary, and is a 2/2 black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. And I had out like some token doublers, and I had a Thalia that died.
Yeah, so Thalia is 1 and a white for a 2/1 human soldier with first strike, and non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast.
Yes, and she is legendary.
She is legendary.
And so I had a Thalia that died, and had a couple. I think I had both Mondrak, and which doubles your tokens that you make, and the one of the death trigger doublers. And so I got Thalia got removed, and then there were 4 Thalias, and my deck is very creature heavy, and everyone else's decks were not very creature heavy.
It made it very difficult to remove any of the issues, because even if you paid 4 more on a non-creature spell to remove Thalia, that it still costs 3 more to do the next one, right? Because there were 4 of them. So that can get pretty oppressive.
Yeah, I mean, and anyone that has played against Mystic Remora knows how much an additional tax of 4 mana is. Like, that is, it's something you would never pay if you had the choice to not, right? Yeah, it's absurd. Another thing on this list that we have are things like Notion Thief or Narset or Hole Breacher.
Yeah, can we just read Narset, because it's like a similar enough effect across all of them.
Yeah.
So Narset, part of Veils, is 1 blue for a Planeswalker. Each opponent it has the static ability, each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. Yeah. And that's really what we care about here. So there's a common play pattern where you play one of these cards and then you make everybody wheel, which means they discard their hand and draw new cards. What ends up happening is they either don't draw any cards or they draw 1 card, right? Depending on which effect you have out. And obviously, like, Hole Breacher is banned. We mentioned that one. Hole Breacher is banned. But these other cards also create a very similar play pattern.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've both done the Narset plus Windfall or just any wheel thing once, maybe.
And then afterwards, took it out of our decks.
And afterwards, like, oh, this sucks, actually. Yeah. And again, it's just because it's more fun for us when everyone's also having fun. Like, I don't know. It feels less fun to win in that situation, if that makes sense. Like, you've made it virtually impossible for everyone else to win with not much effort. And now you're like, sweet, let's just play this out until I win. I don't know.
Yeah, and so I did the Narset thing, and then I was like, ooh, didn't like that. And I was like, let's try Notion Thief. And I was like, this is not any better.
It's not better. In fact, it's worse.
It's worse. So just in general, like, resource denial, I just don't think it's very fun. It's not something that we have found is a fun play pattern in our play group, and so we just avoid it. And it's not like we have a rule. It's not like we've shadow banned it or anything like that. Yeah. Any of these things, they're just things that have just naturally kind of become self-policing because the play group is like, oh yeah, we don't really like those things, we're not going to do it. And that's great. And if your play group loves doing that, do it by all means. We're not saying anybody should stop playing any of these cards. They're just things that we have found to be unfun play experiences.
Yeah, I mean, we played one time. I've only played once against a Gitrog monster deck, and it was a deck that was playing like Wasteland stuff.
Lots of recurable land destruction.
Yeah, exactly. Which, again, is resource denial. I guess, to put an even finer point on it, it's not very fun to play against that sort of thing. And another one that we mentioned earlier is things that end the game, in air quotes, without ending the game, right? And
it ends the game for your opponents, but it doesn't win the game for you.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Very well said. And I hate to do this to my boy, but Toxrill is one of those on that list. Let's read Toxrill for the billionth time on this channel.
Should we just make it? We should just start each episode with a ceremonial reading.
A ceremonial reading of Toxrill the Corrosive. That is so good, actually. All right, let us know in the comments if you want us to read the rites of Toxrill every episode. it'll sound like this. Toxel the Corrosive is 5 black black for a 7/7 legendary creature slug horror that says at the beginning of each end step, put a slime counter on each creature you don't control. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1 for each slime counter on them. And whenever a creature you don't control with a slime counter on it dies, create a 1/1 black slug creature token. You can pay blue black and sacrifice a slug to draw a card. That doesn't make things unfun. It's the first 3 that make it unfun. It's that each end step, you're shrinking every creature by 1 power and 1 toughness, and then getting stuff when they die. Yeah. And this just happens ad infinitum.
Because it's on a creature.
Because it's on a creature. And you can cheat it out because it's on a creature. This has gone in every one of my Reanimator decks and is slowly making its way out in favor of other big bads that still, like even Coma, the Cosmos Serpent, really big threat, really scary, is doing really good stuff for you, but isn't ending the game for everyone else, right?
Yeah, and I do think we mentioned that there are a few things that scale with power level. This kind of threat is something that can scale with power level.
Yes.
Right, because these higher power decks are gonna be more well equipped to deal with something like this.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that goes for like a lot of these things too, right? You're playing stacks and higher power, great. Although I do think that some of these principles do still apply. Like if you're playing stacks and higher power, you better be able to win through those stacks.
Yeah, and not just make the game drag on.
Yeah, exactly. So it's something to even keep in mind at higher power levels and in your deck building at those levels as well.
So we talked about things that end the game for your opponents, but not you. There's another small category here, things that end the game for one player. So in general, Commander is best as a 4-player game. Don't artificially make it 3 players. It's also just really unfun for that one player that gets removed. If one player gets removed 30 minutes before a game ends, they just get to spend 30 minutes not playing Magic, and that kind of sucks.
Yeah, and like, also it sucks for you, right? Like, you're making it less fun because you're playing with one less player, but also, I often like sit there the rest of the game like, sorry.
Yeah,
like,
how many times do you apologize to somebody after removing them super early in a game?
Right, and it's because they were the biggest threat at that moment, but yeah, I don't know. It's really tough. This is
or
like,
not.
Or not,
right?
even.
Some strategies. So let me give an example of a journey that I recently went on.
Yes,
with Satya.
please.
So Satya is a commander that makes copies when it attacks of other creatures that you have. And one of the cards that I had in the deck is Port Raiser. Port Raiser is 3 red for a 4/4 Orc Pirate. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you untap each creature you control. After this combat phase, there's an additional combat phase, and it can't attack a player if it has already attacked this turn. Just so happens that if you have Satya, which makes copies of creatures when it attacks, and Port Raiser, which gives you extra combats whenever it deals combat damage, and there's a player that doesn't have blockers, you can make enough combats and enough copies of Port Raisers to kill that player.
Yes, because none of the copies have attacked that player yet.
Because none of the new copies have attacked that player yet.
And they enter tapped and attacking anyways.
And they enter tapped and attacking.
Right. So this happened in a budget game of ours. I was playing a deck that ramped to a big commander.
And you didn't have any board presence.
And everyone else did. Everyone else had blockers, which would have stopped the chain. And so I think you won very soon after that. And I think everyone scooped because at that point you get to keep half the Port Raisers also.
I get to keep half the Port Raisers, which is pretty good.
Which is huge because Satya lets you pay to keep the copies. Yeah. But even so, you did that. And we kind of sat there for a second trying to figure out how you might just win on the spot. And then we kind of landed on, oh, I guess Spencer just dies, and then we just keep playing, right?
Yeah.
And so and we talked after that. We kind of do a little download after every game we play, and or every session we have. And you were like, yeah, I don't know that I want Port Raiser in this deck anymore, even though it's quote unquote a win condition. It kind of plays like a kill one player condition.
It does. It just can be, if you have a way to get that one Port Raiser in, like, then it just just wipes out that player. And that's just not a play experience that I enjoy because I know that it's not a fun play experience for my opponents. So I did take it out of the deck, and I think it's better for it. Like, even in that same play session, in the second game, I drew Port Razor, I think either in my opening hand or one of the first couple cards. And I was like, I'm just not going to play this card because I've done it, and it's not interesting, and I don't like it. So
yeah. Well, I think that's part of the reason that we've stopped playing Voltron decks. And I want to put a big semicolon here, and we're going to do a quick aside about Voltron decks. By all means, play Voltron decks. They are cool. They are a viable strategy. I think they can be really cool. I had a Voltron deck that I played for a while, actually, that I really, really liked. We've stopped playing them because they introduced that similar play pattern where you either play optimally and just eliminate a player because it's much easier to have only 2 opponents to kill your big creature.
Yep.
Or you play suboptimally and kind of spread the love.
And
but then that also feels like kind of bad, and then you lose, right? And so, again, no hate to Voltron decks, but our people in our playgroup play them. I think some of these...
and I love them. I think they're so cool.
They're so sick. Yeah. I think some of these apply more to just like me and Kelson individually than like our entire playgroup, even though some of them have been like self-policed out of the playgroup. This one I think is more that you and I just have not done.
Yeah, and Satya I don't think is a Voltron deck.
No.
And neither is Jury, but you had this same experience with Jury recently.
Yes, I really wanted to build an Aristocrats deck that played a lot of the really cool cards that I wanted to play in Aristocrats, some of those being things that sacrifice really big creatures, like Ob Nixilis, and I can't remember the name of that one.
Captive Kingpin?
No, that's the one that just came out that's also New Capenna.
Adversary?
The Adversary, yes.
Yeah.
I have thought this card is so cool. I actually saw it played in the big pirate commander that's mono red, and it's played with Thrasios a lot. I can't remember right now. Dargo the Shipwrecker. You play with Dargo
that's cool.
Because Dargo you can cast for much cheaper. Let me read Ob Nixilis first, and then we can talk about it. So Ob Nixilis the Adversary is 1 black red for a 3 loyalty planeswalker. It has casualty X. The copy isn't legendary and has starting loyalty X. So casualty means you can sacrifice a creature with X power, and then it makes a copy that has that starting loyalty, right? So it has the starting loyalty X. It has +1. Each opponent loses 2 life unless they discard a card. If you control a demon or devil, you gain 2 life. -2. Create a 1/1 red devil creature token. When this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. And -7. Target player draws 7 cards and loses 7 life. And that's a cool ability that with Dargo, who has 7 power, you can cast Dargo for very cheap by sacrificing a bunch of stuff, sacrifice it to the casualty of Ob Nixilis, -7 to draw a bunch of cards, and then potentially also cast Dargo again, because once you sacrifice Dargo, he's only 1 mana for the rest of the time, right? Which is really cool. And I wanted to do something like that without playing Dargo, because Dargo really invites combos. So I built Jury. Sorry, this was a huge preamble to Jury. But I built Jury because it paired the cool Aristocrat stuff I wanted to do with the cool big power stuff I wanted to do that also had something to do with Aristocrats. But I played it for the first time the other day and did 36 damage to someone in a single turn by sacrificing an 18 power Jury to a fling effect.
Yeah, Jury is black and a red for a 1/1 human shaman. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, you put a 1/1 counter on Jury, and when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So if you fling it, it'll deal the damage from fling, but then also from sacrificing, it'll deal that damage again.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did not feel very good about that. We've talked about how that feels bad, and I took out this player, and for the next 6 turns while we continued to play, I was like, I'm really sorry. And he was very gracious about it. He said, yeah, I think I was going to win on my next turn, so it's good that you did.
Yeah.
But I could have just killed his problematic creatures, but if
you have 36 damage, you don't want to point it at a 2/2.
That's what I'm saying. And so I think where I landed on is I don't like that play pattern. I still really want to give Jury a shot. And so what I think that means is taking out any of the fling effects from the deck, even though that's a very popular thing to do in Jury, because then I don't have just like a damage doubler right away, right?
Yep.
Like I have to come by it honestly and get him to 40 power.
Which matches the play pattern of a more casual power level that you were building this deck to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes, I apologize for that long-winded discussion about it, and most of that was talking about why I built Jury, and I guess it's because I'm excited about it.
No, that's great.
At the end of the day, it was... So go ahead, please.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, I think what you were going to say was it was something that ended the game for one player, which is something that we have found is not a fun play pattern for us. So we've talked about several of the things that we have found are unfun and that we tend to avoid just out of personal preference. But what about the flip side? What about playing things that are fun? Are there things that actively make decks fun to play against?
Yes, we have talked about this for hours and hours, and I don't know that we have an answer. Maybe this is like a future episode in itself. If we do find an answer, I mean, Kelson, this is something that you've been trying to discover. You've done a lot of Google searching. I know you were saying EDH Recast did an episode on this, and they didn't really give a conclusion either.
Yeah, I don't know that they did it. I don't actually remember if it was a specific episode on this, but one of the terms that I hear come up frequently in their discussions, which I love, is optimizing for fun. Like, how do you optimize your deck for fun? I don't know that I've been able to pull a conclusive answer out of those things that I've heard discussed, and I don't know. I just haven't been able to find one. I'd really love to know how people feel. If you could share in the comments what you find fun to play against, not what you find unfun to play against, but what do you actually find fun to play against? I'd really love to know, because we've talked about a lot of different things and nothing has felt concrete that we've been able to settle on, except for we both think it's really fun to see unique decks do the thing.
Yes.
I think that is something that we have like concretely said and that we agree on. We really enjoy watching cool decks.
Yeah, I think we've landed on this because it's, like Kelson's saying, it's hard to quantify, like, oh, if I add this card, it's more fun for everyone else. And I think that's what we were talking about at the beginning, right?
What cards are fun to play against? What strategies are fun to play against? Yeah,
and that's, at the end of the day, if something is really fun for you, chances are it's not particularly fun for your opponents, right? To play against. Because it's usually helping you win the game, right? And giving you some sort of advantage and maybe taking away their advantage. But these type of unique decks are fun for at least us to watch.
Yeah.
And it's really engaging. Like, it's not necessarily fun from like a play pattern perspective. I don't think we're talking about like fun play patterns, but it's like exciting for us to watch a unique take on a commander, for example.
Yeah, like
that's so cool. Like, I never thought about that.
They're just decks that I still think about that I played several years ago because I was like, that was such a unique take. I wonder where they got that. Maybe they came up with it, and that's really cool. One of the ones that I was thinking about was when March of the Machine came out, and it introduced a new mechanic, Incubate, which is you create a 0/0 token, and then you put a bunch of 1/1 counters on it. Actually, you just create a token. It's an artifact. You put a bunch of
it's not even a creature. It's an artifact. Yes.
Yeah, so we played against someone at an LGS, and they were playing the commander Ginny Fey Jetmir's Second, which is a red-green hybrid, a green mana, and then a green-white hybrid for a 3/3 elf druid. If you would create one or more tokens, you may instead create that many 2/2 green cat creature tokens with haste, or that many 3/1 green dog creature tokens with vigilance. And it was an incubate tribal deck. So they would incubate, and instead of creating the artifact, they would create a dog or a cat and then still get to put that many 1/1 counters on it. And it was wild. The deck went absolutely crazy.
Yeah, well, it was really cool because Incubate typically is giving you something above rate, right? Because it's not actually giving you a creature. You have to pay mana to flip into it a creature. Yep. And it's giving you kind of these counters willy-nilly on these creatures. And so when they actually are not artifacts, they're actually already 2/2s or 3/1s.
With
that's
haste
big.
or vigilance.
Yeah, that's really, really big. Like,
that was sweet.
You play your Titania deck, right? Which creates 5/3 elementals, which are big. Like, those are bigger than... 5/3 doesn't sound very big, I think, to a commander player, because it's like, oh, it's just a 5/3. It's not very big. But when a ton of them happen, it's really scary. And when that's happening even more frequently and maybe even bigger creatures that are hasty or vigilant, it's out of control. And then I think they got like a doubling season 2, so they're getting twice as many tokens with twice as many counters.
But it was something I'd never seen before, and it was something I'd never even thought of before. And so that was like that was a fun play experience for me, even though I lost miserably to that deck. It totally went crazy and totally won, but they were laughing maniacally by the time they finished that game. And it was fun.
Deservedly
I
so.
enjoyed it. Yeah, deservedly so.
Because they were kind of a mad scientist with their deck, right? Of figuring out this new cool way to play it. And that's fun to watch, right? It's fun to be like, oh, that's so sick. I've never thought about that. I think that happened somewhat for me with Satya, and I wasn't surprised because we talked about it a lot. Like when you played it, I didn't have that, whoa, I never thought about this experience. But as you were telling me about it, I did. And then watching it play and execute on that, I was like, oh, heck yes, that's actually so sick. Because you decided to build Satya not as an energy deck, but as a deck that a creature ETB, like a value creature ETB deck.
Yeah.
Because you're getting free creatures. You don't need to keep them, and you don't need other ways to make energy. You're just utilizing Satya's first ability, which is really cool.
Yep. Oh, thank you.
And I think the other thing that we really like, outside of like unique takes on Commander, are like really unique card interactions. I think for me, one of the first ones that did that for me was Tasigur the Golden Fang.
Sure.
And it's because, and I'll read Tasigur again for the millionth time on the channel. But
we'll start every episode with Talk Show, and then we'll end it with Tasigur.
Perfect. Yep. The Tasigur the Golden Fang is 5 and a black for a 4/5 legendary creature, human shaman with Delve. And Delve means that you can exile a card from your graveyard while casting the spell to pay for 1 generic mana. So you exile 5. You can pay 1 black to cast Tasigur. And Tasigur also has the ability 2 and 2 green-blue hybrid to put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, then return a non-land card of an opponent's choice from a graveyard to your hand. And I remember reading this. I was fascinated with Sultai. And I had built Muldrotha, and I'd built Sidisi, and I'd spent a lot of time on the EDH rec page looking at Sultai commanders and finding ones I thought were cool. And I remember seeing Tasigur and seeing the art and thinking, wow, that art is really dope. I feel like I want to build and I also love the Ultimate Master set symbol. I'm such a sucker. It's such a cool set symbol. Like I just feel like all the cards in that set were awesome. And I was like, I don't understand how people are building this and why it's working. And then I watched a couple of videos, read a couple of threads, and even looked at like the CDH versions of it, watched some more gameplay, and I saw how you can put cards in your graveyard and then delve away the ones you don't want again to cast Tasigur for really cheap and then activate his ability to get it back and then pod him away for a big creature. Like there's so many cool things you can be doing with Tasigur that each individual one, I was like, oh, that's so cool. Oh, that's so cool. And those card interactions just like got me more and more excited about it. I don't know. I thought it was so cool.
It's really cool. I mean, this happened with your Marquesa Dealer of Death deck when you built it, and I got to see it happen for the first time. I was like, it can't be that good to just commit a lot of crimes and get like incremental value over that. It just so happens that when you're storming and you're doing it a lot, it is really good. And that was
it's a
really
lot of
cool
value.
to see. Another one that I remember seeing that was a very similar thing where it was like a card interaction that I didn't understand, and then I saw it play and I was like, oh, that is playable, and in fact, it can be very good, was Babala Saga. Watching Joey from EDH Rec, watching his Babala Saga deck go off, and just, I immediately sent it to Spencer. I texted you, and I was like, you have to watch this. This deck is crazy. I've never thought that this could actually be a commander deck before. Yeah, and it was sweet.
I remember you were like, you should build this deck. Like, you should do this, because you knew it was something that like appealed to me, But you were, I remember like your excitement in it was palpable. And I think for us, that's like really fun. Like even if we're not doing it, like if you had been at that table with Joey playing that deck, you would have been so psyched about the stuff it was doing. Even if it just like killed you in a turn, right?
Exactly. And it's because these decks, these commanders, these card interactions are focused and they have a focus strategy that makes the deck more fun for that person to play, and also are more fun to play against. And I think maybe something we can extrapolate from this is that good stuff piles aren't particularly interesting. That's not to say that they're unfun to play against, but
Sure.
it's not like they're interesting to play against. If it's just a deck that has a loose theme and just runs 100 of the best cards in Commander, sure. But there's not an interesting thing going on that's going to keep me engaged as an opponent.
Yeah, in a world where we aren't sure how to actually optimize for fun with each individual card inclusion or strategy or whatever, it also doesn't make sense to like play a good stuff pile when other stuff is like more exciting both for you and for other players, right?
Yeah.
And that's somewhat why I've been steering away from typal decks recently. Like and I feel like you have too. Like, and it's not because we don't love typal decks. I think they're so cool. It was the first like 7 decks I built were typal decks. Mm-hmm. But it's because for me, typal decks, and I have a Will Help deck that's a zombie deck that I love. But to some degree, typal decks kind of turn into good stuff piles with a twist, right? It's like a good stuff pile, but all of it's zombies.
But all of them have a specific creature type on it. Yeah, right. I do feel like anymore, like most of the typal decks that I'm building are trying to do like a very specific thing. Like with Mirim and dragons, like trying to kind of like storm off with dragon spells.
Yeah, well, one that I have theory crafted but yet to build, but that I really want to build actually, now that we're talking about this, is Evelyn the Covetous.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
Evelyn the Covetous, would be a vampire deck. I'll read Evelyn really quick. It's maybe I'll abbreviate Evelyn. It's very long. Evelyn is 2 blue-black, 2 and a hybrid blue-black, black, and a hybrid black-red for a 2/5 legendary creature vampire rogue with flash. And when Evelyn or another vampire enters the battlefield, you exile the top card of each player's library with a collection counter on it. And then once each turn, you can play a card from exile with a collection counter on it if it was exiled by an ability you controlled, and you can spend mana of any color to cast it. That wasn't an abridgment. That was the entire thing. But I do think it's necessary to understand what happens. But I think this is an example, potentially, of a typal deck that isn't just leaning exclusively into typal synergies and good stuff piles. Like, I was trying to play
another thing that it's doing.
Yeah, I was trying to play some cool ETB doublers, and I was trying to play some cool copy effects, or maybe a lot of instants so that I could keep... Or, like, I played Leyland of Anticipation so I could flash in my vampires that were being exiled off the top of my library each turn so that I could... Because it's each turn, right? It's not just on your turn, so I'm trying to get more advantage out of it. I don't know. It's... And like you said, same thing with Mirim. We are trying to lean more towards... away from good stuff piles and towards things that are more interesting.
Yep.
I think,
yeah. And one more note on something that you can do during deck building to make sure that your decks are fun to play and fun to play against is keeping a consistent strategy, but still building the deck in a way that each game feels different, that it's not doing the same thing over and over. One deck that for me is like a once a night type of deck is my Shieldred deck. So my Shieldred deck can win in a really grindy game just by making everybody lose a bunch of life from drawing cards. But it primarily wins through a combo with Sickening Dreams, which allows me to once I have drawn a massive amount of cards into my hand, I can discard cards to make everybody lose life, which would make me win the game.
Which you have gained asymmetrically.
Because I've gained a ton of life. But it's not very interesting to play against in multiples because it is trying to achieve that win condition every game if it can. It's the most straightforward win condition in the deck. And so it's the type of deck that I'm probably only going to play once a night and then put it away and save it for a future game night because the games don't feel that different between games.
Yeah, well, I still remember one of our players in the playgroup who was relatively new at the time. You played Shieldred and you won with that combo because you drew most of your deck with like a Peer into the Abyss or something. Or Yeah, I can't remember what it was, but some effect
sure
like
was.
that. Yeah. And we carpooled home, and he was like, "That was so cool," and he wanted to build a deck that could do something like that, which I think was cool because it pushed him to maybe want to play higher power at some point, right? But also, I do think it, like you're saying, it does have like diminishing returns in the cool factor.
You
if it's
probably
doing
would have
this-
had a very different conversation on the way home if I had just then done that 2 more times in a
right,
row.
exactly,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. So the last thing we want to talk about here is somewhat tangential to this, I think, but also is something that can really improve the play experience of your group if you are open to it, which is proxies.
Aha.
Yes.
Yeah. So proxies solve a lot of problems. One of the main ones is budget, which is cool. Budget can be a tricky conversation to have as a play group. It can be tricky to deck build around. We are a very proxy friendly play group. In fact, like some of the members of our play group don't have Magic cards or have recently only begun to buy physical Magic cards because up until this point we said, hey, if you want to try a deck, just proxy it and see if you like it first before you invest money in it.
Yeah, or play one of ours or whatever, but
Yeah.
they ended up liking ours so much that they, printed them out to play on their own. And for months they've not owned a single Magic card and have been able to play with us a ton. And so as a result, we are very proxy friendly and very supportive of proxies. And that's part of the reason is that Magic can be very like financially prohibitive.
Yeah.
In that sense, if you are trying to buy all the cards and build a deck on multiple axes, right? It's financially prohibitive to build a variety of decks if you want to try different things. It's financially prohibitive to increase the power level of your decks even too, right? If you want to play more powerful things.
Yeah, so including proxies as part of your play group can help everyone have more fun by balancing those power levels, allowing people to compete at different power levels, making it not feel pay to win. That's an argument that comes up a lot of times when people talk about play groups is, that person just spends way more money than I do, so I'm always going to lose to them. And just letting people play fun cards and not making them spend money to do it. There are a lot of fun cards that could be expensive, whether or not that's because they're good or they just haven't been printed very much or whatever the reason is. It just allows people to play the game, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and we know that a lot of people have varying might be an understatement of like feelings about proxies.
Yeah.
Like some people only proxy card if they own a card. That's a camp that both Kelt and I actually fall into until recently when I was brewing a lot and was really feeling the brewing bug and just didn't have the budget to buy any of the cards I wanted for those decks.
So you brewed like 5 or 6 decks, printed them out, and started playing them to see which ones you liked because you didn't want to buy the cards if it wasn't a deck that you liked.
Yeah. And so now I fall in the camp of just like proxying everything until I eventually like want to pare down and own the physical cards for a deck because there is, I sympathize with the camps of even the camps that like don't proxy anything because there is something to be said about playing with the actual, like it feels good.
Sure,
It
and
feels
it's
good to
fun. You know, like humans like to collect things, and Magic cards are no exception to that. Like, I think that's why you and I like to own cards when we proxy them because we're like, yeah, but I also like to just have the thing. It's really
I like
fun
the
to look at
shiny
it in
thing.
a binder. Yeah, I like the shiny thing. And then some people don't like proxies at all. Totally understandable. One of the ones that I do have a little bit of a harder time understanding, and I've heard about it mostly like in stores, that stores will have a policy on like proxying a certain number of cards in a deck. That one I'm not sure I quite understand as much. I'm sure there's a really great reason to that, but all in all, there's a lot of different feelings about proxies. Find what works with your play group and be cool about it. We like to encourage proxying because it allows people to play the game and engage with the game so much more. And that's a fun experience for us.
Yeah, for sure. I think our last note about proxies is just that it can be easy to, I think an easy mindset to fall into with, well, if we allow everyone to make proxies, is that maybe they will proxy just like the most broken stuff all the time, right?
Yeah.
And I think that kind of falls into like the pay to win category is like, well, now you're just putting Lion's Eye Diamond and all of this, I don't know, busted stuff into your decks. The Moxes, even though they're banned for some reason.
Ancestral Recall.
Yeah, or whatever, right? Into your decks. And we've actually found that, for the most part, to not actually be the case. So if that's something you're worried about, like, don't worry about it as much, maybe, because it kind of turns to be self-policing a little bit.
They can, because of power levels and because of our play group's desire to cultivate a good play experience. That can be super hard, and it's super play group dependent. We started off this episode talking about how this is all very play group dependent, but people don't just proxy the craziest stuff in because they know the effect that has on the game, and that's not the game that they're trying to create, right?
Yeah.
So that's why where power levels can actually really help with proxies is you understanding what it is that you're putting into your deck, and then not worrying about the price of the card.
Right.
Yeah.
And then open and honest communication, right, with your play group. I think that's a beautiful bookend. It's very play group dependent. Have conversations. It's very play group dependent. Have conversations. And now we will close with the ritual reading of Tassiger, the Golden Fang.
No, we already did that. We're not doing that.
Oh, shoot. Time. Okay, great.
Thank you all so much for listening. Please like and subscribe to get notified of our weekly Commander content. We are here every week trying to make great content for you. You can reach out to us on thecommanderpod.com. We have some stuff over there as well. So please join us next week. And until then, remember to always pay the one.